Welcome to Game.Set.Chat Town Hall Special Edition. I'm Chanda Rubin, as always, alongside Zena Garrison, and we are joined by my Tennis Channel colleague and co-moderator, Andrew Krasny. We also have a great panel who are also joining us today. Kamal Murray, the founder of Excess Tennis Village and coach of Sloane Stephens. James Blake, former ATP World #4 and accidental activist, as he likes to call himself. We have LZ Granderson, a CNN contributor and columnist journalist for the LA Times, and needs probably no introduction, but the legendary Billie Jean King. So thank you all for joining us today in this town hall. So one of the goals that we had in setting this up, Zena and I, was to create conversation with everything going on, create some honest, informative conversations about, the social injustice, the continued fight for equality, the protesting that is going on, and to hopefully create some positive solutions, some productive actions that we can all take individually and collectively.
Chanda, thank you. I'm honored and humbled to be asked to be a part of this conversation today. I'd like to welcome everyone and let us know that loosely we are going to stick to about 1 hour and 45 minutes. I'll ask you a few questions, and you are limited, especially you, James, to just 3 seconds, 3 seconds each, if you don't mind.
Wow, coming in hot.
But I'm kidding, of course. I am so honored to be here, and I want to welcome everybody. First of all, we're going to have a few sections today, starting with unconscious bias in society. We're going to move into police interactions and especially what's happening with recent events. Keeping the peace is another section. The role of athletes and all of us as professionals is another section. And of course, as Chanda said, our thoughts and our solutions, because if you ask me to find out who starts a fire, you need to find out why they started the fire. If we're going to address cancer, which is what I think racism is, we cannot only come up with the cure, we have to find out what the cause is. And I want to dig deep today and create an environment where all of us are safe. And as Billy said before we started recording, I especially want to learn today. And with that being said, Chanda, I'm going to look to you to kick us off and talk about this unconscious bias that exists in society.
Well, I want to first kind of start with a couple of thoughts that I had, just in thinking of how to kick this off. I was reminded of an article I read with the Congresswoman Maxine Waters, some quotes that she had, having been around in LA after the uprisings in the wake of the brutal beating of Rodney King. And, so much of the narrative, how it was talked about, was about the rioting and the unrest and almost the lawlessness of what was going on. And she kind of took issue with that in this article. She said she called it more of an insurrection, and that a lot of times the language we use to describe things that are going on, that sets the tone, that sets the picture in people's minds. And you kind of consider this country was founded on an insurrection with property damage, people not wanting to continue to follow the rule and wanting equal rights. So why is it that that kind of language has to be used in today's society when Black people are fighting for their rights? Another thing I kind of wanted to start with, and I want to tie both of these things together as I open the floor up. But, I was thinking of kind of the history, Black people's history in this country. So you consider 400 years of slavery, where Black people were forced to work for the economy and the wealth of others, not being able to build their own wealth. Families separated, husbands separated from wives, children separated from their parents, from their fathers, their mothers, and their lives at any time forfeit. At any point, you could be killed and you were only worth the money you brought in. And then you kind of fast forward to the 50 years interim period before the Tulsa race massacre. And I was looking this up, Black Wall Street Massacre. Black people, for over the course of about 50 years, had built up real wealth, their own neighborhoods, their own businesses. And during these massacres of 1921, it was all destroyed by white mobs, and they were left with nothing. There was roughly about 32 million in property damage, the equivalent of that. Then you fast forward to kind of where we are now in the last 40, 50 years, segregation, civil rights movement, the white supremacist organizations, still being able, to kill and intimidate, and at times being supported by the state. Oftentimes these were police officers and organizations that were behind it. And so you look at where we are today, and I think of it like a tennis match. I mean, we're all kind of in tennis, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a 3 out of 5 set match, but one person starts with a deficit. And James, you've played 5 sets, right? So you can tell me what this feels. One person has a deficit. You're down 6-love, 6-love, 4-love. And then at that point, you're told, okay, now it's even, now it's equal. Now you're gonna play with under the same scoring system. You're gonna play on the same court with the same lines. You're gonna play with the same balls. You get, to alternate serve. You should be able to win from here because now it's equal. It's anyone's game. And you can imagine, having someone have to try to win from that position, of course it can happen. But why is that expected? Why is there not an understanding of the fact that Black people, even if there are special cases that are able to come back from that stage, maybe they get a little lucky, they have, extra opportunity, extra talent, Black athletes, that comes to mind. Maybe there are some that can overcome from that situation, but in general, why are Black people, Black communities, Black areas, and Black schools, Black organizations, why is there not that understanding that it's almost impossible to come back from that position, from that deficit without some help?
Yeah, and I think so often, sorry to jump in, I know we all have.
Jump in, absolutely.
It's a great opening, Shannon, but I think a lot of times you're down that deficit and you're blamed if you don't come back because now everything's even. You're down 6-love, 6-love, 4-love, everything's even, you should be fine. And then the other, like you said, there are some that come through it and it's almost like the rest of the people are blamed almost for Black excellence. When you look at someone like, I can't tell you how many times in the last 10 years I've heard, well, look, we had a Black president. We had Obama as president, so anyone can do it. Anyone can be successful. Well, Barack Obama is not necessarily the norm. He was an absolute standout. He was a superstar. He is a superstar. He is someone that was that accomplished so many things, but it was in spite of it. He was the one that came back from 6-love, 6-love, 4-love, and found a way to manage to win. That doesn't mean everyone can do it. That doesn't mean that's the C student in school. That doesn't mean that's the B student in school. That means that's the A+ absolute superstar of the class. So I feel like sometimes it's gotten lost in that, and then the narrative is able to be shaped by those that have been in power and have benefited from the status quo for so long, that have been up 6-love, 6-love, 4-love, and can now say, well, nope, I still managed to win. Everything's equal, because that's the way they want to see it. They don't want to. Most people don't want to admit that they were born on third base, or that they were, born with a silver spoon in their mouth, or anything, however you want to say it. Most people don't want to admit that. They want to put everything on their own achievements, their own hard work, their own efforts, instead of recognizing that there are some differences in where people are starting out in life, and where the rules in each step of the way, whether it be the education system, whether it be the mass incarceration, whatever it is, there are hurdles for some people that there aren't there for others. And that's where we could, I don't know if we want to start with the white privilege conversation of that people, it doesn't necessarily, people don't want to admit it because they don't want to feel privileged. But what they can admit is that it never held them back. Their race never held them back and was never a hurdle that they had to get over.
Yeah, and you're essentially using a fantastic analogy to talk about systemic racism. And, I like to say he or she controls the pen, controls the narrative. And for so long, we've been told that the matches have been started evenly, and the reason why you haven't become a Grand Slam champion is because you haven't been able to defeat these other great champions without acknowledging, as you said, the construct of this to begin with. So,
LZ, we're having a little
and on
bit
top of that, you just got broken, and it's their turn to serve to go up 5-love. So
Yeah, we're having a little audio trouble.
a little trouble with you.
Okay.
Your last thought there, LZ. We didn't get your last.
I'm going to adjust my position, and I'll be right.
LZ is going to join us again in a couple of minutes. If I can use that opportunity real quick to talk about, James, you mentioned how early this has to start, right? When early on in the game, way early, when the conversations aren't happening. And that's where I want to, when we talk about systemic racism, we can't avoid talking about systemic solutions. So what are we missing now, 50 years later, when we're still surprised to be having these conversations? Where do we start to educate? For Billy and I, especially when we're sitting in this conversation, is that I want to walk away from this educated. And we cannot be afraid to put this under the rug anymore. And at the same time, we don't want to appear to be ignorant. We need to get into the minds of why so many people in this country are operating on fear. And what are they so afraid? What is the threat that they're so afraid of?
Well, I think the topic that we started with, where we're going with the unconscious bias, is it's so prevalent, and it's not something that's born into people. It's taught. And so I do think talking about doing it early is starting it. I would love to see it start being taught in schools and as young as first grade, second grade. Because of this movement that's been going on right now, I'm actually encouraged that the principal of my daughter's school wrote to me about starting some sort of a program where they can just learn and people can talk about it and have an open conversation, and what would be best to really teach this to schools. And I think that can be so valuable, because I'm encouraged by what's going on right now with the protests, because it seems like many more younger people are making this really a priority right now. White people, Black people, any minority, everyone is making this a priority. And that is encouraging to me. So if that's the case, I think we can teach so much of the next generation about not just, saying you're not going to see color, but what can I do to actually educate others, and what can I do to be anti-racist?
But James, to your, yeah, and James, to your point, it does start, and it starts young, but it's very important that who we put in those positions. I think that's a huge part of it. We want, and especially in the Black community, we get a little bit of money and we want to separate, or, even a white community separate. It's all about separation instead of making sure the people that are teaching our kids this information, they are the right people teaching this, teaching the information. That's really important. It goes back to anything that we do. It's fundamentals. The fundamentals starts, and what I'm encouraged about right now is the Generation Z, which is that 2021 to 13. They are on it. They've gone through floods. They've gone through fires. They've gone through all of this, and what they understand is that things can happen. It's a lot different from the millenniums that thought that, everything is great. You just, everybody get together, but the biggest thing for me is going back to the fundamentals, putting people in positions that are teaching our kids to be able to understand that it's okay to be together.
And I think, we talk about one of the solutions might be getting everyone together earlier. One of the things that I think tennis does, if it's done right, is it gets young kids, Black, white, brown, Asian, together earlier, and they get exposed to each other, so that they're not, the first Black dude that tells them that they love them is not at 25 years old. Black girls who have a Black coach at 12 years old, from 10 to 18, have been exposed to a positive Black man, right? Mm-hmm. So that when they go into the world, they don't have this, all Black men are a threat, or they're all looking to rob and rape and kill and that kind of thing. And I think, part of, my experience is I can name 10 white kids that I've taught that can honestly say that at the age of 16 or 17, they had a Black man that never touched them, never did anything wrong to them, that told them that he loved them, helped them succeed. And I think that, Zena, is the generation you're talking about, where they're now 22 years old, and now they are in control of their narrative because they have social media. They don't have to ask permission to speak anymore. So now they can say, okay, I can speak out right now via this medium. And my experience has been different, because there has been a little bit of progress over the past 10 years where some programs have integrated, right, and gotten exposure, peer-to-peer. The peer-to-peer experience has been different. And I think that social media has really helped that generation you're talking about take control of their messaging.
Yeah. Well, So I want to jump in, and glad, LZ, you were able to get back on. We're getting a little bit of wind feedback. So when you are ready to, maybe mute yourself when you aren't talking, and then when you are ready, unmute yourself. But I do want to let you continue your thought, and then allow Billy, if you want to jump in as well. But I want you to continue your thought, LZ.
Well, I was just talking about an apologies for there's some work being done inside my apartment, so I'm trying to find a space where there's not a lot of background noise.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I failed.
Good effort.
No worries.
I'm trying. I was just correlating your beautiful analogy about the tennis score to what systematic racism really is and what it looks like and how it plays out. Because I recognize that for a lot of people who don't view themselves as racist.
Oh, darn. They know we want these thoughts and working against us.
Here we go.
There we go.
I know, listen. It's like everybody and mama trying to get a hold of me. Except for my actual mama. My mama ain't actually calling me, but everybody else is in there, mama. I recognize that if, say you're at home and you're watching CNN and you're struggling paying your bills and your parents struggle to pay their bills and you happen to be white and you hear these Black, educated, and in some cases well-off people talk about systemic racism and oppression, I can understand how seeing that juxtaposed to your own life is confusing, if not infuriating. And so it's important that as we talk about what systemic racism looks like, it's not about comparing yourself to another individual and going, it didn't pan out that way. It's about looking at the communities in its entirety as well through the backdrop of history. And two of the things I like to point out in terms of systemic racism has to do with a beloved Democratic president, FDR, and his New Deal. And I like picking on FDR because it helps illustrate how simply identifying as a Democrat or as liberal or as a hero doesn't mean that you're insulated from contributing to systemic racism. And during the New Deal, one of the things that was really appalling and contributed to the wealth gap is the fact that for about 30 plus years or so, there were more than nearly actually $200 billion in government-backed loans that were available to help homeowners come out of the Great Depression. But less than 2% of those loans were made available to minorities. So in other words, you had about 98% of poor white Americans being able to rely upon the government to help them buy homes, which we know is the precursor to individual wealth, and less than 2% of minorities, African Americans in particular, were able to tap into that same system. And this was sanctioned by our federal government. So if you're able to buy a home as a part of as part of the greatest generation, and then pass it down to your baby boomer children, you're passing down wealth. Where in the meantime, minorities are passing down more poverty. And the other aspect of systemic racism that needs to be talked about is the role of unions. When unions were formed and white Americans were able to unionize and demand better pay, were able to sometimes get their education paid for because of unions, healthcare, obviously. Well, the jobs in which minorities were predominant, they legally were not allowed to unionize. And so here you have our white counterparts able to compound wealth, take care of their families, get health care from their families through the unions, and Blacks weren't able to unionize themselves and demand the same things. And on top of that, the minorities who were part of industries that were dominated by whites were able to unionize, were prevented by the unions from joining because of their own racism. So when you look at those two things in and of themselves in terms of how this country was shaped during the Great Depression and into the next decades in the 60s and 70s, you had the federal government and you had unions, for instance, keeping minorities down, purposefully by design, keeping minorities down. You can't unionize. We're not helping you buy a home. You can't build wealth. So even after Jim Crow, even after slavery, even after all those things, you still had this kind of systemic racism keeping generations of Black Americans down. And so I understand that for some people who may be living in poverty and who happens to be white, saying, what are you talking about? I'm not being benefited from being white. Maybe you as an individual can identify specific instances in which your color helped you. But if you pull back and look at the whole, you can see how even after the March on Washington, the impact of systemic racism still had on minorities and is impacting us yet still today.
When I think about, and I want to hear from Billy, I want to hear from you. I think being well into my 50s, to still feel that I'm learning this now makes me want to ask, why is there a Black History Month? Why isn't Black History part of our curriculum? Why isn't it Black History Year? Why isn't that part of our childhood history books in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade? That's how we're going to start to tackle and educate ourselves. I mean, thank God for this platform right now, but the platform has to be so much larger.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about, Andrew, you're talking about the pages of our Black history that have been torn out, so you don't know about it.
Yeah.
Well, yep. Anyway, I'll get my 2 cents worth in now, but Chanda, thank you so much for teeing that up, and thank you for having me on the show. As I was listening to each and every one of you, it really gets down to power. It's all about power, and people keeping their power that have it and not letting others in. And that's the way it's always been. As we go through this, I'd also like you to think that, I hate to say it this way, but race usually trumps gender as well. So as we go through this fight in the future, I want us all to be together, and it's the best it's ever been. I'm in my 70s, so I was in my 20s during the 60s. And the biggest difference is when we had the protests in the 60s, all you saw basically were Black people protesting, especially with MLK Jr., Martin Luther King Jr., who I adored. But now for the first time, and thanks to, I think, to technology, the phone, we can mobilize faster, everyone can give their opinion, is that we finally, I think for the first time in the history of this country since 1619, have a chance to truly change things that have to change our laws, and then changing the hearts and minds of people to match the law. Because you can put a law into place doesn't mean that people are going to obey it. So these are the things we have to do from now on. And the kids today, the young people, are fantastic. Does everyone know who started Black Lives Matter? So it's 3 young girls started it, and they founded it in July 13th, 2013. And I don't think, that's why I'm so big on history. The more I know about history, the more I know about myself, the more that I learn. And also the most important part of this history that young people need to learn, and obviously Black history would be part of it for the first time, instead of just the white history, which gets me crazy, is that we can truly be together for the first time. Yeah. And this is our chance to truly change things. And everyone has been marching. I mean, every race has been marching instead of just Black. So it's showing inclusiveness for the first time in my lifetime. And that's what's making me excited. And we can do this because of technology, mobilization, communication, and everybody's sick and tired of it. I hate racism. I know a lot of white people and Latinx people and everybody, we hate racism. All of us hate racism on the show. So we have to get rid of it. But the problem is people in power, dominant groups,
don't want to let go,
know a lot about themselves. They know very little about subdominant groups, okay? They know very little. Subdominant groups, the way we have to navigate, we have to know what these guys are thinking, because we have to navigate each and every day who's in power. I mean, that's all we do is we dance the dance. But there are a few people in this power base that actually will make a difference too, when we find them. I mean, in tennis, we've had them. Joseph Coleman helped Arthur Ashe. He helped all the men in the beginning in the late 60s. And then he made it possible for the women to have a tour. And he was a white Jewish man who had just great compassion for everyone. So we have to have them with us as well. Kamal, you made it happen with Excess, because you've got rich white people, you've got rich Black people, you've got the community together to have Excess. It's fantastic what's there. You didn't leave South Chicago, you stayed in there, you've made South Chicago better, and you've given kids a chance. I mean, I love going there. So these are the things we have to figure out how to work together somehow. But I think we can this time for the first time. I really have hope for the future, and I'd love to know what all of you think about it. But I think what I've seen is, and also in the 60s, the protests were only in the United States of America, if I remember correctly. They are now throughout the world.
That is a fantastic point, Billy.
And we got rid of apartheid through this for Africa, South Africa, because they're basically the leaders in a lot of ways. So we have an opportunity now. And also with the pandemic, even though it's been horrible, people are unemployed, so they have time. Mm-hmm. We've had to be isolated, so we have time to talk to each other, really, either this way or together with your families at home. Things are calmer in some ways, except for the frontline workers, and that's a whole nother discussion. And people are unemployed, but when you have unemployment, like the Depression in the 30s, you have time to talk to each other. And I think that has made a difference as well. And then also see how precious life is with this virus, and realizing, wow, we've got to make the best of every single moment we have left on Earth, and for our children of the future. Well, that's my observations.
No, I think that's great, Billy. And I'm jotting things down. I mean, these fantastic points. And, you mentioned, Billy, the need to change laws, but also change the hearts and minds of people, especially those that enforce the laws, and, recognizing the influence that we have on each other. White people have on other white people, Black people have on other Black people as well, and vice versa. But I want to kind of tap into that and how that maybe goes to unconscious bias, where if you aren't changing the hearts and minds of people, what kind of preconceived notions are they coming in with, and how much of an effect is that having? I mean, we're kind of seeing it now. The protests were sparked by the killing of a Black man in the middle of the street by police, where there is bias coming into play. We have a woman, Breonna Taylor, who was shot in her home, and there were suspect circumstances in terms of how they entered, and the bias going on when you are encountering someone that you think a certain way about that may not be true. You look at Ahmaud Arbery as well, and his situation. So I'm curious, and I know, James, you have spoken a lot about this, particularly with your experience, being a professional athlete, well known, but it was simply obviously because of your skin color, you looked like another Black man. How does unconscious bias come into play, and how dangerous is that, especially when you are dealing with someone who's in authority, people who are enforcing laws, people who are making laws, and in terms of those areas?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's extremely dangerous, and I think Billy sort of hit the nail on the head with the ones that are in control. They have the power; they don't want to give it up, and I think some of them very, very much do so on purpose. They very much want to control that narrative and say, as many are saying, that the protesters are thugs, or any sort of group, like you said, the insurrection, like Maxine Water was talking about. It's viewed as an insurrection. It's viewed as very negative. Any sort of group of Black people is seen as negative, whereas a group of white people maybe just, it's just a band of brothers, or it's something like that. And I think so often it is unconscious bias, where I'm sure Zena, Chanda, you probably heard this throughout your careers. They're just just a great athlete, just a super athlete. And sometimes it means well. There's definitely people that say it meaning well and not having any sort of ill-conceived notions behind it. But some of them, it's almost as if saying, I almost took that as, well, what about the hard work I was doing all that time? And what about the fact that I spent time with my coach doing scouting and deciding which way was the best way to play and all this kind of stuff? It's, well, they're just a better athlete, so that's it. And I think those kind of unconscious biases, they start to kind of add up. That's just a very simple tennis example, but they go further and further into, well, every Black man is a drug dealer. Every Black man is a suspect. They're all going to look alike. It's just, one after another, because that's what you see on the news.
Yeah.
Every report on the news is, it was an African-American man, 6 feet tall, charged with a robbery, charged with a rape, charged with a murder, and they just try to kind of, I feel like there are some that are doing that on purpose, that are trying to just pummel people with that information and just say over and over and over again till it's ingrained that that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for a suspect, that's what you're looking for. And it ends up being the way they can completely control the narrative, that if you're ever in trouble, if you're standing outside, you could be that suspect. If myself, LZ, come out, you're just standing outside. They've heard for so long, they've seen on the news for so long that that's what a suspect looks like. So no matter who you are, and like we were all, for most of us, we're inside of that tennis world bubble, and you don't think about it as much until, if you're Black, you step outside that bubble, you go to being a suspect. You're white, you step outside that bubble, and you're still sort of in your bubble. So it definitely changes your dynamic, and it's been that narrative for so long that controls that bias.
Now, is the only way to address that is person to person in terms of systems, and how do you, and of course anybody else can chime in, but how do we address that type of unconscious bias and just thinking things that aren't really true of every Black person?
Yeah, I think that people just need to, let's take a pause and think about, like, do some internal soul searching. Because when I think of the unconscious biases that are, quite often associated with Black men, is that the physical stature makes them intimidating, right? If we two people on the call right now just said 6 feet. I'm looking for a Black guy 6 feet. That's pretty tall. That's not average height. We're normally bigger because we did the work in the field. I think they view Black men as fearless. And so when you have white police officers or just, some white people thinking larger stature, bigger physicality, fearless, right, and probably has less than, then it makes you approach each situation with probably a little more aggression than necessary, right? So had somebody walked up to James outside the Hyatt, if they just walked up to him and spoke to him, he would have responded. But because he is athletic build and tall, right, then it's like they got to charge up and bring more aggression than necessary. I always sort of laugh. We were walking down High Street 2 summers ago, me and a couple of other African-American people who were, in town for the tennis tournament. And, we're always, as tennis players, trying to avoid people, right? Because you don't know if they're going to ask you for an autograph or a picture or whatever. And you can see them cross the street as soon as they see the 4 or 5 of us. I'm like, we are more afraid of you asking for a photo or an autograph than you are of us, right? And so, like, and we're clearly in Wimbledon Village for the tournament, right? Not because we live here. So, I think that those sorts of things cause a lot of the over-aggression because of some of the things that might be true. 6 foot plus, physical stature, we have less, which makes us fearless, right? Or makes us want to take, right? That those things contribute to the unconscious bias. And I think if we start to, people start to take a second and just think, do I really think that way? If I'm walking down the street and I'm approached by 2 or 3 people who match this description, does a piece of me feel a little less secure?
Well,
I'm in the white group approaching you, okay?
Don't ask me for an autograph. I'm nobody. Right.
So, now let's just say the group starts talking, among us about who is approaching. I think it's really important when someone says something ridiculous, like, we better go to the other side of the street. Those Black guys are coming, or Black. I think you have to say, stop it. Just stop it. That is ridiculous. We're staying right here. And that is, just stop it. And I think whoever speaks up, people have to speak up when they hear bias. When you hear it, you see it, speak up and keep pounding on everybody, especially white people. We have to keep pounding on our fellow white people that maybe they'll listen to us, maybe not, probably won't. But we have to keep pounding on people we know, I don't care what color. But I think we have to keep pounding when we hear stuff that is just absolutely ridiculous. I know when I hear the news and they said someone's gotten murdered or someone's like that, you know what my first impression, what I think first? I go, please don't let it be a Black guy. That's what I say first.
You're not the only one. We say that too.
I'm saying we got to get Black people to start realizing the duration of young Black men is just outrageous.
I think
it's 60% or something. It's just horrible. So we have to stop this madness. But I don't know how you're going to do it in certain areas. I just.
Well, it takes one person to sort of start a trend.
Sure.
One of the things that I work hard at while I'm on air or when I'm writing, particularly about sports, and this is as it pertains to LGBTQ issues, which I think are also very tangible in this conversation, is that, you know, when they were talking about the players coming back to play in baseball and not wanting to be away from their wives or girlfriends, I would always say, or husbands or boyfriends, you know, just reminding them that is important. That it's important that you remember that this world we live in is much broader than the one you continue to paint. You know, when I talk about referees, I say she or he, and people look at me and I go, yeah, she or he. You know, and those are the things that you need to do to kind of challenge, I believe, subconscious bias, not in necessarily in a confrontational way, but just in an informative way, to make sure that people feel included and let them know that the world is a lot broader than the one you've been painting for however long you've been on air or been a journalist. And my field, our field, when you're in front of the camera, we have a lot of power in that. You know, we don't have to preach. We don't have to give a sermon. You can simply just inject some truth in the conversation that people normally just have about these topics. And the other thing I would just talk about, just in terms of addressing, you know, that bias that you may not be conscious of, is don't take it personal.
Yeah.
You know, someone offering you more insight in terms of the conversation of, you know, race or gender, so anything along the socioeconomic ladder, no one's calling you a bigot. No one's calling you a racist. What we're doing is just expanding our view of the world. That your worldview is fantastic, has gotten you this far, but your worldview is not the only worldview. And don't be offended by that. Don't be offended by information. That's all it is. Better information to help you see what the world actually is, and not just the world through your own prism.
And
Well, go ahead, Z.
LZ, I think that also a big part of, we have to also, as Black people, have to be aware. We have to also see things differently too, and sometimes listen, because so many things have happened to us. Sometimes we have a tendency to shut down before we maybe even hear what someone else says. So I think, you know, I've been listening and hearing a lot of what's going on, but no one's really talking about sometimes the self-Black hate that we've had on ourselves for so long that we shut down sometimes before we maybe even be able to come together and to listen to the other side as well. It's very important how we speak to each other and how we talk to each other. Because I know for me, sometimes if a white person comes up and starts talking to me, if their tone is a certain tone, I'm already thinking they're going somewhere else. I'm already shut down. You know, and certain words that they use, I'm like, you really don't know what you just said, but you know, I have to sometimes take a deep breath also, because it might be a situation where I can get a point across to help them, but I might have shut down already. So I think we both, you know, all different races have to, you know, as Kamal said, chill a little bit so we can understand each other.
Well,
I'm tired of being the Black woman with the head roll and everything just because I'm.
But I think one thing that we have to understand, guys, is that we're in a society, and I'm not going to get political, but we're in a society where a landscape right now is instilling fear. And there's a lot of fear. We have to figure out, how do we approach someone who's fearful? And how do we approach someone to help them change, when change is one of the hardest things for anybody? Yeah. Change is very seldomly welcome, right? So it's even hard for people to get out of bad relationships, because that represents change, right? So how do we come up with solutions in society to approach these individuals who are so afraid of change, who are so threatened at loss of power, and to convince them that there is another way to look at life other than just yours, but I'm still not trying to hurt you?
Well, I think I just want to just inject real quick, not to give a long answer, but just the characterization that we're in an environment right now where there's a lot of fear. I would argue that there's always been fear. It may not have been white fear, but there's always been fear.
I agree.
You know, it's like I always joke with my friends. It's like going, yeah, you guys made a show called Happy Days, but Happy Days for whom? Because the time period in which that show was being produced and broadcast, I can guarantee you, it wasn't always happy for everybody. So, you know, the fear has always been there. It's just sometimes it shifts. You know, it's like Black fear, Latino fear. You had governors trying to pass show me your paper bills in their states. That's Latino fear. So there's always been fear. It's just constantly shifting. And with the shifting of the fear comes the shifting of finger pointing.
And I think it's been magnified by the 24-hour news cycle. I think for a long time, people would, okay, go to work, you come home, you watch the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, whatever you watch, and for a half an hour, you see a lot of times bad news, and you get that fear, and it's in you, but then you kind of forget about it, or it goes, you know, it kind of gets deprioritized. And now with 24-hour news cycle, you can just continue to it just festers and builds up and then builds up and builds up. And there's so much fear because some of these news companies, obviously not you, LZ, there's a lot of great people in the media.
Not me.
But exactly. Some people in the media, they're preying on the fact that this is why people want to keep watching, or this is why people do keep watching, is because they're getting more and more and more scared. And now they're so scared that, well, I have to watch more because I need to know all this information. Otherwise, something's going to come get me. Something's going to be terrible. Something's going to happen awful to me personally, to my community, to my kids, to whatever situation I'm in. It's going to be awful. And I think some of these huge media corporations are preying on the fact that they can sell fear.
You know, I want to, as we come kind of to the halfway point, I want to kind of play off of that, because what we're talking about now is the result of a specific incident and the protests behind that incident and others that have occurred in the recent past. And, you know, you think about Black men and police interactions, you get stopped by the police. Is there even a consideration that there is some fear in Black men when they are in that situation? And so some may automatically think, okay, they're being aggressive, they're being this, they're being that. They're just scared. They may not know what to do. And that doesn't seem to kind of be part of the conversation as well. Yes, there is fear on all sides. And in these particular situations, can we not step back and try to understand that? And maybe some of these interactions won't prove fatal. But, you know, I know, you know, Kamau, we were kind of talking a little bit about that the other day. You know, you get stopped by the police, and as a Black man, you know, what is that like? How do you, you know, do you feel like you can diffuse it? Or if you don't, you could end up in a situation, you know, like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
I've been stopped several times, and now that I have kids, I'm way more conscious about what I say back and how I respond, because I'm fear for them. And, you know, today you have to humble yourself to a point that's so low that it is almost embarrassing. The last few times that I got stopped with my family in the car, I was embarrassed at how I had to behave in front of them, because I was much less of a man than they see me as, because I was afraid that if I said something, you know, the wrong way, or, you know, I had rolled all the windows down so he could see it was car seats in the back. And I will tell you, it's almost demasculating the level that you have to reduce yourself so that you can make sure this person walks up and doesn't feel, you know, threatened or overreact or make a knee-jerk reaction. But I mean, it's to a point now where, you know, it's embarrassing if you're in a car with somebody else, how low you have to take yourself. You have to become an infant so you don't get harmed.
But why did they?
I've had Kamau has got ready to get stopped, and I've been on the phone with him. He's like, Zena, don't hang up. So it's
yeah.
To hear the conversation.
And I know, James, you maybe wanted to weigh in on that as well. It's incredible.
Yeah, so I mean, every Black man, I'm sure, has the story of being stopped for no reason, for a taillight, for an insurance, for anything that they're going to use as an excuse. And the fear is absolutely there. And I have kids, Kamau, you have kids, and we've dealt with our parents. I mean, I had that conversation with my dad about how humble you have to be, how much you have to say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and do your part to absolutely diffuse the situation, even though that's really supposed to be the police officer's job, not your job to diffuse the situation. But this has gone to a bigger point that I have about the fact that this is where the bad cops are really doing a disservice to anyone that's trying to do their job the right way. Because someone might be trying to do their job the right way, and I'm scared. Kamau, you might be scared. LZ, you might be scared of the situation, and you're not going to act as predictably if you're scared, if you're nervous, if you're tense. And if they have their hand on their weapon, or if you forgot to roll down the back seat window and it's tinted, and there's, and then you have this interaction when you're nervous. Now someone that's doing their job the right way might still get more and more jumpy. That's where I think the accountability needs to be such a bigger issue, because they need to get rid of the cops that are making it so that we have no trust. And I mean, LZ, Kamau, you can speak for yourselves, but I would guess there's almost zero trust in the fact that when an officer comes up to us, it's going to be a fair procedure. They're going to be okay. Nothing's going to happen. I can have a comfortable conversation with that police officer. That just doesn't happen until they have to be far and above just being respectful or being nice for me to start feeling comfortable with a police officer that comes up to me, because I will probably forever be tainted by what happened to me in New York. And so many times before that, when I was stopped, I was harassed, and I grew up, I'm a mixed race, my father Black, my mom white, and my mom never experienced any of these things. And then she sees it happen to her husband, she sees it happens to her kids, and it kind of shows you that there's sort of two different worlds when it comes to being stopped by the police.
Yeah. What are some of the solutions? I know, James, you talked about more accountability with police officers. How do we make that happen? And what else do the solutions maybe look like?
Well, one quick one, I'll let someone else talk, but I just think one that is important would be educating police officers much more on sort of mental health and de-escalating situations, on being more than just I've talked to some of the older police officers. I've talked to a lot of police officers since what happened to me. And a lot of them are afraid of sort of the militarization of the police, that these are guys that are just want confrontation, as opposed to people that are looking to keep the peace, people that are looking to solve problems and be more into helping the community, as opposed to just making more arrests, tackling more people, abusing more of the community. They want to actually be helpful. So I think that in terms of the training, and needs to be more of a psychological background check or whatever you want to do for these police officers.
What about ramifications, though, guys? What about someone who's finally willing to stand up and prosecute these police officers for abuse of power? I mean, it obviously there's that they're hiding behind a shield right now, or they're protecting their fellow officers. Are cameras on uniforms helping? What can we do to start making a dent after we've educated to help weed out these guys who are protecting their own, when that's really not what we're asking them to do, right? We want them to not be afraid to call out who's abusing their power. How do we get to that level?
Well, I would say that, I've been covering, unfortunately, these sort of murders, as well as the protests and the conversation afterwards, from the White House down for a number of years. And, I've kind of put together my 3 to 5 things I like to talk about when people ask, what do we do? And for me, like, the number one thing is you have to establish that if a bad cop is arrested and is going through the process of being convicted, the public has to know this is going to be a fair process. And one of the things that undermines this fairness or perception of fairness is the unhealthy relationship between district attorney offices and police unions. We have a situation where police unions are allowed to donate millions of dollars to the district attorney that they like. And surprise, surprise, more often than not, the money's thrown behind district attorney officers who do not prosecute bad cops. So you can't have this dynamic go on, because people, whether that district attorney is corrupt or not, it's a perception of the conflict of interest. If you're getting $2 to $3 million right here in Los Angeles, our district attorney, she received $2 million from the police union, and then another $1 million went to the PAC that was sending out attack ads against her opponent. That's more than $3 million from law enforcement to prop up someone who's prosecuted less than 10% of the officers who have killed people. So when you have that sort of dynamic, how can you have trust? I think another thing that needs to be addressed, and this is very specific, obviously, with Mr. Floyd, but not unique, in the sense of when you have an officer that's racking up 15, 16, 17 complaints, and they're still able to be employed,
Take them out.
that's a problem.
Take them out.
If I'm at ESPN, if I'm at ESPN and I got 15, 16, 17 complaints, trust, I'm not at ESPN anymore. And I don't think there's anyone who's watching will still be at their job if they had that many complaints. So there needs to be accountability that once you reach a certain level, you cannot be a police officer. And the third thing I would say is that there needs to be a national database so that everyone is cognizant of police officers who are forced to resign or fired for bad behavior, so they can't go out and be rehired at another department.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so they try to shield that every step of the way. They try to shield their records. It's very difficult to find out how many complaints they have, and it's, you know, because this case was so public and obviously became such a an instigator for protests and everything. His record came out, but so often it's impossible to find the records of these police officers when that should be public. It should be for everyone to know. If you've got a bad cop that lives down the street from yours in your precinct or whatever, your area, you should know that someone's had 10 cases like this, and like you said, they should be out then.
Yeah,
So,
I know Kamal, you had a couple of thoughts as well, and afterwards, James, we're going to let you go, but we'll get this in, and certainly appreciate your time. Kamal.
So to James's point, one of the things that we all have to, become educated on, because it is a matter of public record, is the police contract. And one of the James's points about the record keeping of misconduct in the contract, I pulled the contract just because, we've had lots of time on our hands. And a couple things that stood out to me was that it actually requires the destruction of police misconduct records 5 years after the occurrence.
Really?
Yeah, so it's in the contract that a police record is destroyed 5 years after the occurrence.
Wow.
Number one. Number two, they do not allow the COPA investigator to interview the police officer if there's an incident, whether it's a police brutality case, wrongful death, whatever it is. They do not allow the COPA investigator to interview the police officer within 24 hours of the event. So that police officer has an opportunity to step back, listen to the victim, because the victim has to speak right away, right? He's interviewed right away. He's got to go to the police station, file his case. The police officer has 24 hours before he legally has to say a word, right? And then they allow, once the police officer comes back, they allow him or her to review the statements, their initial statement, before there's any additional questioning. So this police officer has 2 or 3, opportunities to get their story right, and they get to hear the other side's story before they even have to speak. And so those things have to be amended in the contract if we're going to try to address the behavior. Another new thing, I think, is this new solution is, this world still revolves around money. And if you've got 4 officers that are standing there and one is misbehaving, I think that we need to be clearly mobilizing around an initiative. And one of them could be any wrongful death or police brutality settlements should not be paid by the city. They should be paid by the police pension fund. Because if there's 4 officers sitting there and this guy has a wrongful death case that costs $10 million and all of that money comes out of the police pension fund, those other 3 officers might say, hey, bro, you got to get up. You're about to cost us $10 million. Right? And I think that's how we get people to start policing each other and checking each other. You know what I mean? My friends, that I'm friends, and we get out and we start having a good time. If somebody gets out of hand, they be like, okay, let's chill now. You tripping.
Let's
slow down, right? We're about to get in trouble. Let's slow down. And so I think that, if we want police to police, we've got to have these actions impact all of them, right? And so that's one solution that, with everyone engaged in the millions of numbers we have now, is probably hard to get it passed. But now would be our best opportunity, given the attention that's on it right now.
Because, Kamal, to your point, but because most of them, even if they kill somebody, they do something, they don't get convicted, they still get their pension, don't they?
And the city pays the bill.
They're taught to say the same thing. I was afraid they're taught to say the same thing. I was afraid for my life. That's the pat answer every time. I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
And then,
so if the good cops, so if the good cops can, sort of police the bad cops or be better influences.
They have to. They should. They gotta get rid of. They gotta get rid of these secrets. Secrets don't work. The church did it with pedophiles. I mean, you can't do that.
Hey guys.
Well, so I wanna give James the chance to make another comment, and then James, you can just pop off whenever you need, and we will pretend that you said goodbye already.
All right. Yeah. I mean, come out. I think he had a great point. I'd heard that as a possibility as well. As the pension funds, if it actually costs them, because it is too often that they don't feel any sort of accountability. The city pays out, they go on, and even to LZ's point too, is they can go to another city, and that other city, it's almost like they're trading. I don't know what to call it, but like an underground organization where they can just trade and say, okay, this was our problem, now it's your problem, but we'll take one of yours in return. And it's like they're trading, and they're allowed to get jobs and keep gainful employment in a job that is allowed to carry lethal force, and they clearly don't have the psychological makeup for. So there needs to be a way to handle that, so that it's open records, so that we can know this is someone we don't want working as a police officer in our city. And that, it's going to hurt them. If they do something wrong, then that's how other people will actually police them, hopefully, is say, hey, this can't hurt my paycheck. I need, I'm doing my job as hard. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm doing everything I can to put food on my table for my kids and everything. And I don't want it taken away because my partner is not acting appropriately and harming part of our community. So, I mean, those are real life possible solutions that we could do. And it's unfortunate that the other issue that LZ brought up is the unions. It's unfortunate that it's very difficult to actually enact those because those unions are so strong, because they have so much money that they're donating to politicians, they're donating to attorneys. They're making themselves so powerful that it's very difficult for the normal person to get involved and actually make a difference in those unions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think
James has to go.
I got balloons to fill up and stuff
James.
for a very socially distant party, though.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
JB. James, thanks for joining us. We love you, man.
Thank you, guys.
All right, brother.
Thanks, JB.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
So guys, if we move on to, and if it's even possible to just shift gears, but talking about how we can look at solutions on keeping the peace. And Chanda and I talked about this earlier. Chanda, some of the examples of what we can do to start calming things down a little bit while we're in the process of making change. And James just left. I spoke to James a couple of days ago about baby steps, and obviously we have to make changes in November. We have to vote. We have to vote on every level in our communities, moving up and up and up and up. But what are the roles that some of us can start to take, Chanda, in getting a more peaceful community and a more peaceful society?
Well, so I was thinking about, this keeping the peace theme. And for me, it entails good people who are non-racist, self-proclaimed non-racist, but if they see bias, if they see racism, and it's not really something they're doing or concerns them, they'll just ignore it, accept it, and go about their business. So you have a lot of people like that. I mean, we probably have friends like that. And until a situation comes up, we don't really know what they think, because they don't go one way or the other. They don't ever have to make a stand. You also have, Black people who are maybe afraid to speak out because they end up getting repercussions. They get blackballed. They can't get jobs. They can't get opportunities afterwards. And so it's not them maybe actively choosing it, but because they're trying to protect themselves, they are unable to help create change in those areas. And, you also consider that applies to athletes who have some of the strongest platforms, but in some cases are literally forced to not speak out because of those instances. So I'm curious as to what you all think, how we can, sort of bridge that gap. I know, Billy, you have talked about what you feel the role of women should be as well, but how do we bridge that gap? We can talk about athletes, we can talk about, corporations, people in power, but how do we bridge that gap between people understanding it's not just good enough to not say anything?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's important that people know the difference between sympathy and empathy. You know, sympathy allows you to be human, but it doesn't do anything to help the situation. Empathy, on the other hand, the empathy, you can't escape very easily. It hits you in your bones, in your core. I like to correlate it to, and this is not to be too graphic, but I like to correlate it to when a man sees another man getting hit in the nether regions, right? We immediately know what that is. Some of us physically will bend over with that man because we know how painful that is. That is empathy. And that is what we need to happen when it comes to racism. You need to feel that pain the same way. Even though you didn't get hit directly with it, you recognize what that is and the damage it can cause, and it sickens you to the point at which you physically have to respond to it. I don't like the notion of I don't see color. When people say I don't see color, I get very afraid because that means you're either lying to me or you're lying to yourself. Either way, there's a dangerous lie being told. It's okay to see color. The question is, what do you do once you process the differences in color? Are you ranking the color? Do you have fear of a color? That's the part that makes you uncomfortable. So instead of you doing the work, you just like to say, I don't see color. Well, I encourage you to do that work because you know I'm Black. You know you're white. It's like, why are we doing this? Right. Why don't you spend some time figuring out how you really feel about that? I think those are the couple of things, you know, I would like to see happen once we get past this season of protest in the streets, and you know, as states begin to lift up the quarantine restrictions, and we begin to socialize. And in California here, they're talking about opening up the gyms and the bars again. Once we return to normal, you're going to have the option of relaxing back into what you were once before, or actually being impacted by this to the point of empathizing with the struggle and not going back to what you once were. Those are your simple choices.
Yeah. I don't want to see normal. I want to see a new normal. And that's talks right directly what you're talking about, is having empathy for others and getting into action when it's appropriate to change things. And we have to be, you know, we have to be the change that we want to be. We are, the people are the change. And just thinking about when Kamal was talking about the police and James, I was thinking that we have to create a different culture, totally. I think you guys brought up some great ideas, but it's got to be in the law and our actions together. We've got to, we can talk about it a lot, but we've got to find a way to get the system to change. So we have to be able to do that somehow. And I think we've got to find people of power who agree with us because they have money and they can get things to happen. But we've got to change the laws, but then we've got to match up with the laws, and we've got to speak up. I mean, here's, you know, Ella Jones just got elected Mayor of Ferguson. 4 years ago, Michael Brown gets killed. You know, she says, I can't take this. She gets on the council. Now she's the new mayor of Ferguson. This is a person who said, I'm not going to take it anymore. And she got into action, and now she's the mayor. And we need to see that more and more. I mean, we've got Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, for God's sakes, and she's gay. She's the first gay mayor, talking about what earlier we're talking about with the LGBT community. But we're also not a binary world anymore either. So we have to include the theys and the people that feel how they want to be self-identified. We have to be very alert and very okay, whatever you want. Just I even ask people, how do you want to be self-identified? Because I don't know anymore. And half the time I don't know if I'm being politically correct. Half the time I'm like, I'm so nervous I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to hurt their feelings. And I'm like, I just go and ask them now. I go, how do you want to be self-identified? What do you want to be called? I just ask them because I don't want to hurt their feelings. I want to keep learning also, which I still think is just major. But we have to not just get involved, but get committed. And I actually don't want to see this calm down at all. I think for the first time I'm seeing peaceful protests, and you know the kids and the people that come in after the peaceful protest, you know who they are. A lot of them are white nationalists. They're just creating all this havoc. We can't let them get ahead of us on this. We cannot, we've got to say, we were not going to take it anymore with racism. It's over. And every single moment of our lives, we have to keep fighting for the right thing. And for our children, like, you know, Kamal and James was talking about. And I just have to ask you one thing, Kamal. When the police officer stopped you that night and you put all the windows down, you had all the kids in the back, and I don't know if Jen was with you or not. I think you said yeah. What did he claim that you'd done?
Didn't use a turn signal to change lanes.
That's the biggest one.
Seriously?
Yeah.
We always stop for that one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, my dad was a police officer for a very short time and then became a firefighter. And my dad left the police department because he told his mother and my mother that he was losing faith in humanity as a police officer. Yeah. He said, I can't take it anymore. Yeah. I cannot be around. I can't. So he left and became a firefighter. So.
Well.
And I had on a onesie because it was Christmas night and we were going over to my family's house, and you know, we wore onesies on Christmas. I was like, please don't ask me to get out the car in my onesie.
Well, you're better off than I am. One time I was stopped, and I'm halfway embarrassed to tell this story, but I think it's to your point. I had just left my boyfriend's house. This was when I was young and still attractive. And I left my boyfriend's house, and I was in my t-shirt and pajamas when I was stopped. That's it. T-shirt, pajamas, and flip-flops.
Oh, no.
I get pulled over because the cop was curious as to why I was in the neighborhood. Now I'm going home. I'm in my own neighborhood. And I'm actually rushing a little bit because I need to get to work. I wasn't speeding, but I was just kind of in a rush. And so when he asked me, you know, why are you in this neighborhood? I was like, I'm going home. And I was short with him. And he goes, well, what do you do to be able to afford to live in this neighborhood?
What?
And
we all have that one.
and I'm not going to lie, I went off. And because I went off with that question, I ended up not only in handcuffs, I was in jail with my t-shirt and pajamas and flip-flops for resisting arrest. And when I asked why I was being arrested to begin with, I wasn't presented with an answer. And at this point, I've realized I've lost the control of the situation, not that I ever was in control, and that I was in jail. And, you know, thank God, one of my great mentors, he happened to own the LGBTQ bookstore in town at the time. I called him up, and he bailed me out of jail. Wow. And we had a real heart-to-heart because he was a white guy, and he knows me, right? Because he's like my mentor. And yet he has this vision of the police, and he's trying to figure, how does this work? How does this guy that I know end up in this situation under the premise of this policing that I know? And he had a come to Jesus meeting as well through that experience. So, brother, I've been there. At least you had a onesie on. I was out there in my pajamas, and they weren't even my good pajamas either. They were ratty ones. They were short.
LZ, did they ever press charges? Were there charges filed?
No. And what ended up happening was I get bailed out of jail, and then I go to work the next day. I was a reporter. I was not long out of graduate school, and I wanted to write a piece. And my boss didn't want me to write a piece. He thought that would incite the situation, lets you know where he was coming from. But he did call the police chief, and I received an apology. But you know, it was all bogus. And it literally started with a conversation that was rooted in nothing but bias. What do you do to be able to afford to live in this neighborhood? And it was dehumanizing. It was emasculating. It was all the things that you don't want to be confronted with when you're, you know, a black man in this society and a white cop pulls you over.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking about. I'm more like Billy. I don't really want to. I'm saying I don't really want to keep the peace. You know, that's kind of a key word to me. When you say keep the peace, we've been keeping the peace for over 400 years. I'm tired of keeping the peace. I want to move on to something. And the thing with that, and a lot of times people say, well, why don't certain Black athletes speak up? I don't want certain Black athletes to speak up. They don't need to speak up. And most of them do not know the difference between, you know, our history. Most of them don't know that we had a Black Wall Street. All they know is what the next Chanel I want to buy, or what, you know, so certain ones I do not want to speak up. But the ones, what they can do is support the ones that are speaking up. Now they can do that and that know their history. So that's what, you know.
Can we throw some props out to 16-year-old Coco Gauff? I mean,
she's great.
I mean,
she's awesome.
She's awesome.
She's the best. Coco's our hope, man. She's our hope. She's so articulate. She's so articulate. Yes. She understands the past. Her grandmother's on her all the time. It's really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the way that she came for Roger too. She wasn't afraid. She came for Roger right there on social media, and she told him that he needs to educate himself. Right? Yes, yes, she did. And then she supplied him with information, with links and things for him to think about. And I was like, you know, I like to think I'm a badass. I don't know if I would have came for Roger in public like that. I don't know, you know, but I might have did it like, you know, off record on the side somewhere, court 17 when he was walking by at the U.S. Open or something. But I don't know if I would have came for him so publicly. So I was in awe of her bravery. I was in awe of her fearlessness. She's fierce.
That's youth.
That's youth. But the
NZ youth, they ain't playing.
No, they're not. They are not.
Yeah. But I want to, you know, mention about Coco, because I loved listening to her speech. She spoke at a Black Lives Matter event in her hometown in Delray, and she just laid it out. This is what I've done this week. I've been talking to my friends, educating them, my white friends, on what they can do and helping them to understand what's going on. You know, number 2, you need to vote. Number 3, you need to keep educating. Like, she laid it out. And I was so impressed because, you know, it's not, and even what we're doing here, this is not about sitting around and complaining and talking, okay, this is bad, that is bad. It is about finding solutions. It is about challenging people to come on board with those solutions, to support each other, and, you know, to collectively try to keep moving things forward. So I love what she's doing and what she said for that reason alone.
Yeah,
I agree.
Absolutely.
She's the best.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. Like sports, the fact that there's no sports going on, because I always think about what role do athletes play in this? What role do sports figures play in this? And the fact that right now, if you think about it, the French Open would be going on right now.
Yep.
Major League Baseball would be in season. We'd be in game 1 of the NBA Finals, right? And that would create a scenario where we would move on every 24 hours. Who won game 1? All right. Wins game 2? Who won the quarters of the French? All right, who plays each other's? That allows people to move on and allows the media to move on and redirect the energy to something they wanted on. And so I think the lack of sports is playing a humongous role in not allowing us to move on from what happened. And so I attribute a lot of this free time, this attention to sports. And, you know, the coronavirus and this together was sort of first of all, it's all bad, right? But them together is the perfect storm of allowing us to sit still in this moment and not cheer for the hero. You know, right now the Lakers will probably be in the finals playing somebody else. And, you know, that would rob us all of the attention we need to pay to this, right? Or hopefully Sloan will be in the finals of the French or something. You know,
there you go.
So, you know, all these things. And now we don't have that to root for.
Okay, Andrew and I are the 2 whites here. Why don't you 4 blacks tell us? No, I want you to tell us.
Y'all not that close to white, though. I mean, I'm just saying.
Uh-oh. Billy, LZ, there he is. Okay.
I know, first I left, and apologies, I had a malfunction battery-wise, but we don't need any more of that.
No.
I want to know, as a white person, and you guys are black, what can we do as a white person? At least I don't want to speak for Andrew, but what can I do as a white person?
You can, Billy. Go for it. You can speak for me.
All right. What can we do to help the most? Do you think what white people can do? That I really always wonder. How can I help?
My hand is raised. But one thing, that question about, what can we do? That's a good question. But sometimes it's also from you, Billy, I get it. But when we get that question from some other white people, what can we do when you really don't want to? If you want to do something, I'm like, Coco, speak up.
Right.
It's very simple. Speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Learn.
But Zena, I think what we're doing now is that we're in this situation and we're in this platform and we're sitting here in this grid on our computer that looks like it's the Brady Bunch. I want to look over here at Kamal. I want to look over there at Billie Jean. But it's the fact that we're here. We know, like, I can't expect any of you to walk in my shoes. I don't want to assume what it's like to walk in yours, but I'm committed to walk beside you, and I want to know what I can do to be a better person. The guy in Maryland who's been arrested, do you know about this case where this guy was on his bicycle a couple of days ago and he took some flyers? So the company made to order fired this guy. They found him, they fired him. And I read the response from the company that fired him, and I'm gonna make a pledge right now. The same pledge that I made a few years ago when we were in La Costa. I made a pledge to not text and drive anymore. So I'm stealing some of their words, a little plagiarism here, but I'm gonna make a pledge here to strive to promote an environment that recognizes the dignity, diversity, and worth of an individual within my community, together with the commitment to treat one another with respect and compassion. I stand in solidarity with the Black community, with my Black friends, and to me, that is my expression of how Black lives matter. So I'm making this pledge right now.
Yes,
and you're speaking up. And you're speaking up. And that's
is that good? Is there any, I don't know. I'm trying to.
I will say, Billy, I don't think you necessarily have to ask the question, because you are constantly asking it and you are constantly looking at ways you can make things better. You can make the world better. You can make it better for women. You can make it better for minorities. You can make it better, for people who are different, who don't have the same viewpoint. And I think that's what's important. There was one of my friends who's from Louisiana is now living in Los Angeles, and she's been posting, and great person, never thought she needed to do more or anything like that. Wasn't ever a consideration, but she started looking at ways she has been overlooking Black people and people of color. She mentioned, there's this record, this song that I love, I absolutely love, and the woman on it, and I know it's a Black woman, but the woman on it, she makes the song, but her name is not included in the credits. Really? So she had trouble finding out who this woman was. And she made it her mission during, these last couple of weeks, last week and a half, just with more intention. She made it her mission to find out who it was and to post her name and to let, people know who made this particular song so good. Now, it seems like something really small, but if that's always the mindset, I think that's the biggest and best way for individuals to start making changes, because then it changes how you sometimes think about things. Yeah. It helps you to learn something new, and then it puts it and pushes it to someone else. So, I think there are little ways that every individual, anyone watching this town hall, you can start today by doing that, and, just pay it forward.
Well, that's been my promise in social media, is to promote Black people every day and the causes and everything. I've been doing that for a long time, but I've stepped it up, obviously, a couple of years because of what's been going on. Because now I've been influenced even more that, don't sit back and just keep pushing every day. It's like it's like serve and volley instead of chip, lob and be on the baseline. It's really serve volley time for all of us. No prison. Just get in there and go. Even that racket down, hands up the other day was cute. I like that with TFO and Broomfield.
Powerful.
They're cute. And then you guys were all in it, weren't you? I think Jana, I know. Yeah, you guys were all in it. So I thought that was cute. But I think tennis is a global sport. Yeah. Has an amazing opportunity. And also we have men and women. And we've had transgenders. We've had, a lot of people playing our sport. A lot of sports are only for men. Baseball's 150 years old, more than, and it's only men. You've got the NHL, which is don't have a league for the women yet. You've got you've got the NBA is better. The women are far behind. The WNBA is better. Particularly, it's a huge Black culture, so they really have an opportunity. The NFL is only men. I get really frustrated because I feel like we're all in this together, which we are, but we're really not included very often. And if we are included, we're on the sidelines being the support system, right, instead of being the support and the leadership. And I think every human being should be in both roles at different times, whatever it takes. And I look at the world as a team. I love team sports actually the most, but so I look at the world as a team, every human being. And I think we now have a chance to be a true team in this world with these protests throughout the world and how I see the inclusion for the first time. This is the first time in my whole life, actually, I'm 70, I'll be 77 this year, that I'm actually excited that this is our moment to really make an impact long-term, not just a little in and out, a flutter. And I think we've got to keep this excitement, this energy, focus. We have to know that each one of us are part of this solution, and we truly have to have empathy and care for each other and find a way to really change, because there's a lot of great police officers in this world that we've got to make sure they come forward and they get the lead in the police department. And I think you guys brought up, Kamal, you brought up a great, everything's self-interest. So you have to figure out what's in everyone's self-interest. And if you take the money out of the pension, for instance, that'll be very much in all of their self-interest to make it right. Mm-hmm. And that's the right way to think. How can we figure out self-interest, get the laws right around self-interest, get powerful people to help us because they have the money, the power, and we need a leader to bring us together again with empathy. So that's a whole nother decision. I don't like to get into politics too much, but in politics, we need more women in Congress, more people of color. I don't know if you saw Senator Clyburn talk the other day, but he's fantastic from South Carolina. And he remembers the dogs and all that and the civil rights in the 60s, so do I. We had all these assassinations in the 60s. We had Evers in 63, I think Malcolm X 65. We had Bobby Kennedy, we had Martin Luther King, and those two we really looked to for the future. Martin Luther King was a young man, and he was fantastic. And he and Malcolm X really talked to each other, I think, a lot and helped each other a little bit. One calmed one down, kind of the other got him a little more aggressive. Malcolm X got him a little more aggressive. But, you know, I really was looking for those. I was looking for those Black leaders that I just mentioned, and also Bobby Kennedy at the time. And the 60s were very tumultuous. We had Vietnam. It was really a rough time. So, but we also got the vote from 21 to 18. And guess who was really big on that were the young people. They hated Vietnam. They said if you die for your country at 18, you can definitely get to vote. So that's what happened in the 60s. So what I see now is similar, except this is better because we're together, and we've got to make sure nobody gets killed at the top like those leaders. We've got to protect those people that are good, and we need them. But we've got to find a way to keep this going forward. These protests are good. Let's keep going.
Yeah, Bill, we're talking about leaders too, and just the whole thing about we also, when you're talking about sports or in Congress or whatever, it's really important to have the right leaders there. We can't, and we as Black people also have to come to this whole thing about, well, there's a Black person there. Well, if that Black person has the overall view of trying to help everybody and just so self-absorbed, they're not the right person to be there.
Correct.
And that's a lot of time. It's much easier for the white community sometimes to put in those people because they're no threat. But someone that has an opinion, they're not willing to put them in there because they also know if they put that person with an opinion or ideas, that actually multiplies into, you know, what we're talking about here is bringing more people together. But if you have a self-centered person in those positions, they're only thinking about themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about not bringing politics in, and particularly into sports, right? I mean, people like to watch sports. They like to forget about problems. They want to be entertained. And so, you know, shut up and just play, shut up and just dribble. And you get that a lot. But in reality, the only way to create change is to vote, is to put people in positions of power that will create policies. And so it's politics, and it overlaps. Why is it that it has been such a thing? I think it's changed over the last week and a half. It's now politically correct for athletes to be speaking out right now. But why has it been this idea of you're an athlete, stay in your lane, you're an entertainer, stay in your lane, actor, whatever you are, stay in your lane and stick to that and don't bring politics into it? Why has that been a hurdle?
Well, that's one of the biases. One of the biases is that you're an athlete, you maybe went to college for a year or two, then you turn pro, therefore you're not educated on the issues, right? So that's a bias that exists, that if you are a world-class athlete, your gift is your athleticism. Your gift is not your brain. And I think those things, that's one of the biases that I think exists that we have to stop. But the second thing, I think, you know, as athletes, we've got to also, what's most important to those athletes with a very big platform, they've got to be very clear, right? So if we, on what we are mobilizing around. So the protests are great, but now that we've got everyone's attention, I think we need to get real clear, real fast on what needs to be changed. Everyone needs to go and read the contracts with the police unions have with the cities, with FOP, and say, okay, now that we've got everyone's attention, everyone mobilized, what are we mobilizing around? Next time somebody sends out a tweet that has 10 million followers, what are they tweeting, right? So now it's time to get into action. And so I think, Chanda, you know, that's why it's, you know, athlete, your gift is this, your gift can't be that, right? And, you know, most people believe that you cannot be gifted in multiple ways. You know, I've had several people say to me, now, very few people are great at this and that, right?
Is that just about Black people? I mean, you don't hear it as much with white athletes. You know, you hear, okay, they can speak, freedom of speech, you know, but why is that? Because these Black athletes, the biases that they aren't able, you know, to have the same education, the same knowledge, the same thought process.
But it's not even about education. It's not. It's really about white comfort, and I hate, you know, harping on this aspect of it, but, you know, take the Heisman Trophy presentation, for instance. Joe Burrow spoke very passionately about poverty in his county. And what ended up happening was he was held as a hero. There was money donated to food banks to help the people from the county, the poor county that he's from. And he used his platform to try to help his community. And he was held as a hero. That is truly no different than what someone like Coco Gauff is doing, using her platform to help her community. The difference, of course, is that what Joe Burrow wanted to do, or J.J. Watt, when he wanted to raise funds for hurricane relief, is that he didn't challenge white people to come out of their comfort zone. And so it was acceptable that he didn't just stick to sports. Because remember, J.J. Watt using his platform to raise funds for hurricane relief has nothing to do with football. It's about helping his community. But that's okay, because no one was discomforted by that. It's when you challenge people with your platform that they want you just to stick to sports. They don't want you to stick to sports. They want you to stop exposing racism. They don't want you to stick to sports. They want you to stop making me uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about this right now. When people come at me and I happen to be on ESPN or on ESPN and they tell me to stick to sports, I said, why don't you just say you're uncomfortable? Because that's what you really mean. Because when I use my platform to encourage you to donate to the food bank during Christmas, you're all for it. That's not sticking to sports. Why don't you just come to Jesus, admit what this is really about, so we can move by this collectively, as opposed to you masking behind that stupid phrase as if sports is only stuck to sports. If you have a stadium built that's brand new that your team is playing in, there were politics involved to get that stadium built. We've never stuck to sports. Sports, as a professional sports specifically, has never just only been about on-field play. If that were true, Jackie Robinson wouldn't have a day. So let's stop with this BS about your comfort, and let's do something really productive about addressing why you're concerned about this, as opposed to masquerading behind it and try to shut me up because you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
No, he's right on. No, you use the word comfort and being uncomfortable. Those are really two important words. And I always tell people we learn when we're uncomfortable. It's good to be uncomfortable. That means something's gnawing at you that you need to change or help or do something. I think it's great what you just said, Elsie. You're right on the money, because people want to just be comfortable. No, people in power are comfortable. They want to keep their comfort. No, we are uncomfortable. The world isn't right yet. We have racism. We have all kinds of challenges. Stay uncomfortable and keep learning and keep trying to make a difference and keep leading and use our platform. We need to use our platform. It's an opportunity that very few people have. When I was 13 years old, I knew I had a privilege of being a tennis player because it was global, and I didn't know the word at 13. I knew I had a platform because of it. I knew at 13 how important it was. And of course, you see golf. I mean, you see Coco, she's only 16. She gets it. She understands it. I understood it she understood it probably much younger. But you have to realize this is a privilege as an athlete. And athletes don't just say they're an athlete, because to be a great athlete, you got to be smart. You got to be emotionally smart, and you've got to be mentally smart to be a great athlete. Okay, so when people start talking about, I heard you say blacks, but they talk about athletes, whites as well sometimes, that we're just dumb jocks. And I hate it, because it's not true. There's a lot that goes into learning your sport. And I think we learn a lot of, I use what I've learned in sports every single day of my life. In business, in real life, and every single day I use what I've learned in sports. And if every kid could be in sports, oh my gosh, it'd make a better world, because you learn how to navigate.
Right.
And as a woman, if you're in sports, and you don't have to be a great one, you don't have to be number one or anything. We learn how the world works and how men created the business world, and particularly white men. And we have to navigate if we're ever going to be a bigger part of Congress. Same with blacks, same with everybody. Actually, gender and race need to stick together, actually, because we're all in it together, because we've all been discounted, and no human being should be discounted.
Well, I'm curious, Billy, what do you see? I mean, this may be one of the last kind of topics we kind of cover, but what do you see, if any, as the role of sports organizations? I don't know if you talked about this when I was rudely kicked off the conversation. But what do you think the role of sports leagues, sports organizations, is there a role for them apart from the individual players?
Well, you've seen the NFL come out and apologize now to Kaepernick. I mean, they didn't understand what he meant. I mean, they got so confused. I mean, oh my God. They started bringing the military and the law and order, and that's not what he was talking about. He was talking about racism. Hello? I mean, it's like they missed the ocean, not the boat. Now they've got it. Drew Brees has finally apologized. It's good. And it's important when people evolve that we apologize. Doesn't matter what it's about, and that we move on and try to help make the world a better place. But I think, this is probably off point, but when I think if the leagues had spent as much money and started women's for sports like baseball back in the 1800s and all these other sports, that we would be much more part of society and be honored, and we could lead more. We could make a bigger difference in politics, because sports is politics. Everything is politics. That's another thing. When people start acting like, you were talking, I think LZ and a couple of you said, oh, just, your athletes, your sports, just be quiet, just go do your sport. No. Politics isn't everything. So when people,
it doesn't make sense when people say that, because they want to bring you in when they want you to come in and say something. But then they want you to shut up when they don't, when they want to control you. Now, classic example, and I'm not going to say the person's name. Actually, I don't remember her name. But LeBron James and the lady that told him to just Fox News, just go and dribble.
Yeah. We don't need to bring up her name. I know her name, but we don't need to bring it up.
So anyway, but the whole thing with that is, you know, but then people are like, well, where's LeBron? Why isn't he saying something? But the minute he says something, then you want to crucify him. I mean, it's like,
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Now, I'm curious.
But on the other end, I'm sorry, Chandler, but on the other end of that, someone that has proven that he cares for his community, like a LeBron, like, you know, we do want to hear from him. But those people in the back, they should be supporting him. People that, you know, don't want to say anything, we should be supporting LeBron. You know, you don't have to be the one. He's already said, it's okay. I'll be the one to take on everything. I'll be the one to say something. I'm not afraid. So that's the whole thing. And you know, I'll say even, you know, me and Kamal with, you know, just dealing with trying to have kids in underprivileged programs and stuff like that. Sometimes our own people hurt us more than some white people. It's like, we got to lift each other up, not bring each other down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious because, you know, that's kind of like two parts, you know, maybe, you know, opposite sides of a coin. I mean, you talk about white athletes versus Black athletes being able to speak out and how they are embraced and encouraged because of what they're speaking out about. It's comfortable. A white athlete speaking out about causes doesn't make anyone uncomfortable, but a Black athlete speaking out about causes important to him, it makes people uncomfortable. Even some Black people, it makes uncomfortable, right? So
but
I think it's interesting, you know, to consider.
I got to get this in. Why would you would give J.J. Watt's raise for the Houston Hurricane thing? He raised what, $40 million? Everybody gave to J.J. Why J.J.? There's some other Black people like Whitney Mercer and people like that are doing just as good or better, but they struggle to get support. They give this guy, oh Lord, I didn't want to go here, but they give this guy all this money, and then can you tell me where it went in Houston? Can somebody tell me?
I'm not in Houston. I'm not at liberty to say.
But to my point is because he is J.J. Watts and he's white, and then you have a Whitney Mercer on the same team that's doing all these great things as well, and you're quick to throw your money to him.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
That's what I'm saying. That begs the question, and I want Andrew. I want you to jump in because I mean, is that white privilege? I don't know exactly. You know, we all have our ideas on that, and you know, what is that, and how does that come into play in these types of situations? The way you kind of see it.
Well, first of all, I don't want to lose track on when Billy brought up what can we do, right? We're the two white people on the Brady Bunch grid, and I'm looking over, and we heard back from Zena and Channa. I didn't hear from Kamal and LZ because I think, first of all, well, I need to know from you guys what we can do. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to ever speak for Billy.
For white people.
For white people, and first of all, I've learned so much about white privilege, now about these, what was the phrase you used, LZ, about change, right? We don't want, was it white comfort? Is that what you said, white comfort?
They like to be.
I mean, that's a new phrase that I need to know. I need to be educated. I need to know as I walk beside you. I'm not going to walk in your shoes. None of us can walk in each other's shoes. But I want to find out from Kamal and LZ what we can do. What are some of the small steps that we can start to take?
I think there's two things. Number one, you know, when white people get around sort of the dinner table with all white people, if you listen closely, there's all types of unconscious biases that will come out. And I encourage you to challenge that person to say, why do you think that? Or, do you really believe that? Billy's great at that. Everyone knows if you sit at a table with Billy, you better be ready to defend your thought, because she's going to ask you why and why and why until she gets to the core. So I would say, you know, once you get around the table with those people, really try to get them, because the infant to racism is unconscious bias. You know, racism is the end result of somebody growing up believing that, you know, black people are inferior or not as smart or great athletes or they have less, so they're going to want to take something from you. Like those types of things will come out. And so I just encourage you to, you know, really have those conversations with people around you and not let people feel, and not attack them for it, but get them to, like, you know, point it out. Hey, just so you know, that was kind of biased, or that was kind of racist. Right. I know you didn't mean it that way, but that was kind of racist, right? So that they become more like, wow, maybe it was. That's number one. Number two, I think, you know, black people have to get really clear on the second step. The second step is what laws or what policies do we need changed? And then once we get clear on those, then you all can use your platform to get behind those, right? So I think we've got some work to do before you can step in and sort of, you know, help us on phase 2 of that, which is why I keep going back to that. We've got to, you know, if the police contract is not amended, no behavior will change, right? So I think that, you know, that's step 2 is to really get behind, you know, because, you know, people like Billy do have reach into politics and into lawmakers, right? Great relationship. So, you know, once we get clear on what laws that are clearly wrong and clearly promote, you know, behavior, you know, bad behavior by some bad apples, then I think you can get behind those. But, you know, if everyone just takes a step, if you encourage those around you to take a step and just really do some soul searching and say, yeah, that was kind of racist, so that was kind of biased, so that was probably wasn't a fair statement, right? Then I think that's a good conversation. And then promote those around you to get their children early exposure to black people. You know, I keep going on to that, is that, you know, getting youth, you know, youth are taught this bias, right? And because they are not exposed. I mean, me and Jen always talk with the kids, you know, just like, what color is mommy? Orange. What color is daddy? Black. What color are you? I don't have a color, right? You know, these kids they learn this sort of racism. And so I think that, you know, if we can just get kids exposure to each other, then I think they're more comfortable later on, because I think that's sort of important. So those are my 2 things. Just have conversations with the people that are around you, you know, without black people present, so they can speak freely and be more open. Right. And then once we get our issues clear on what we need to get changed, mobilize behind it.
Okay, LZ?
I agree 100% with everything Kamal just said, like everything. I would add 3 more little pronged sort of areas of focus. Because it's June and it's Pride Month, I'm going to use this phrase, come out of the closet. Some of you are closet anti-racist people. You're in the closet. It's time for you to come out. One of the biggest factors based upon statistics that have led to significant changes in terms of the way that, you know, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people are viewed in society is because we came out of the closet and people began to realize that their sons and daughters and friends and coworkers and bosses and church members were also part of that group. As long as you stay in the closet, people they don't realize just how much or how large this conversation is, or how large this community may be. So if you see something, come out of the closet and say something. You know, don't just stay in your comfort because you don't feel like having a confrontation, because your lack of willingness to have a confrontation could ultimately lead to someone's death. Number 2, I would certainly encourage you to be intentional. If you live in a large metropolis, diversity and opportunities to interact with people who are not like you are more plentiful. But if you're in a mid to small size town and you realize that everywhere you go, then you need to be able to expand your worldview. You know, sometimes it can be done via, you know, entertainment. Sometimes it can be done via a trip. Sometimes it's simply deciding that, you know what, we're going to go to this museum, or we're going to attend this event, or we're going to do this. We're going to purposefully expose ourselves to something that is unfamiliar to us so that we can develop a layer of comfort with. Now, again, that has to be intentional. You can intentionally reach out to people who were not Black or white or Latino. My son had no idea who was going to walk through the door at points, you know, because I just wanted to make sure one, that I was doing all I could to expand my worldview, but also two, make sure that he grew up recognizing what else was out there in the world and who struggles in what ways or who celebrates in what ways. And I'm really proud of the fact that when I look at him now, there was a period in which I had no idea who he was going to bring home. Just like he didn't know who I was going to bring home. And it was a beautiful thing to see that he didn't start to finite in his friendship circle or the things he was interested in. And this goes along the lines of, being uncomfortable. You're going to get some things wrong. You're going to say the wrong thing at a certain point. You're going to offend somebody. That comes with it. And don't be afraid of speaking out on something you know is wrong, because what you don't want to do is say the wrong thing. And a caveat to that is that it is also important that we as minorities, whether you're a sexual orientation minority, gender expression, race, religion, what have you, is to recognize when someone is trying to reach out in good faith, and they may not have the perfect vocabulary, they may not even have the exact perspective that you would like to hear communicated, but what you are witnessing is someone who's willing to try. And that's how you begin to build. People will say the wrong thing. And if you can determine that wrong thing is not met with malicious intent, it's not nefarious, it's just they simply don't know, then let's open our hearts to each other to try to share. We, as minorities, we know just about everything that needs to be known about white people because we have no choice. It's part of our survival, and oh, by the way, it's still dominating all of our media and the way that we're being taught. You, as a white society, need to ask yourself, how much do you really know about Latinos? Everyone's not from Mexico. Everyone is not, I mean, I'm just going to keep it 100. It's like everyone, it used to drive me crazy to hear people talk about Manu Ginobili in the Euro step. I'm like, that's not from Europe. He's from Argentina. Why do we keep calling it the Euro step? But it's little things like that, we're beginning to shape this world, but not with the right information. So it's important that we step out of our comfort zone, be intentional in terms of expanding our worldview, and come out the damn closet. You're going to say some things wrong. You may lose some white people, but guess what? If you lose a white person because you said Black Lives Matter, you may not want that white person in your life.
Right. I hear you. I so 100% hear you, LZ. Chanda, I'm telling you, I want to do, instead of a book club, I want to do this club. I want to check in with each other, because this is such the beginning of these kind of conversations that have to be had. I mean, I still want to see Kamau in his onesie and LZ in his pajamas.
Oh, man.
I want to, hey, Z, I want to know, I know you're upset about JJ. Well, you're not upset.
Lord, I'm gonna get killed for that comment.
Oh, wait a minute. I want to know this $40 million for food or whatever. How much of it went to minority? How much of it went to blacks and minorities?
Well, Billy, I researched it and I could not find it. I saw that 8 million went to Save the Children, 8 million, something went to all these different places. But and we all have foundations or understand foundations, if money was sent for hurricane to come for hurricane, it's supposed to be for the community. So that's supposed to be $40 million in the community, not nowhere over there. Houston.
That's why I wondered where to go.
Well, let me just tell you, I researched it for about a couple of weeks, and some other people started asking questions. So to answer your question, then it was taken off of his website. So I don't know where the hell that money went. Oh Lord, he's like everything here in Houston, so I might not never get another dime from nobody else.
It sounds like that's a conversation you got to continue offline. We need some research done here. What happened to the money?
Where is the money?
Where is the money?
The money.
Where is the money?
But I have to say, this has been a fantastic show, and I have enjoyed every second of it. I want to thank all of you. First off, I want to thank Andrew for just digging in.
Thanks, Andrew.
Doing a fantastic job keeping me honest and keeping things moving in a positive way, as well as for your insight. And so I appreciate it so much. Zena, as always, it has been a blast, putting these things on together. And Kamal, Billy, LZ, and James, of course, who had to pop off. You guys have been fantastic. I enjoyed the really honest discussions. We talked about a lot of things that I think can continue to help move us along that were important, but we also came up with solutions. And for that, I truly thank you all for creating a productive discussion here. That is it for this special Town Hall edition of Game.Set.Chat. Thank you for watching, and please continue to follow us for more chats.